Please have your blue books open to page 68, the organization of our national government. Have a pen or pencil ready and a highlighter if you have one. We're going to start by reading the first part up at the top. The first three articles of the Constitution establish the basic structure of our national government known as the federal government. So the national government, the government in charge of the entire nation, so the one in charge of all the states, is known as the federal government. These articles created three separate branches of government with different powers and responsibilities. Article 1 is Congress, Article 2, the President, and Article 3, the Supreme Court. So remember, we have the Constitution, which starts with the preamble, and the preamble is the intro. It explains the purpose and the goals. So then the second paragraph would be Article 1, which explains Congress and everything about Congress and how Congress is supposed to be set up and how it's supposed to run. Then Article 2, which would be like paragraph 3, is all about the president and how the president works and how the president's powers and responsibilities. And then paragraph 4, which would be Article 3, is all about the Supreme Court and the court systems for our country. So Article 1, the legislative branch. Let's read at the bottom. The first article established the legislative branch known as Congress. Congress has two houses, the Senate and the House of Representatives. So the lawmaking branch, the legislative branch, is called the Congress. Congress has two parts. One part is called the Senate, and the other part is called the House of Representatives. In the Senate, each state is represented by 2 senators. In the House of Representatives, each state is represented by a number of members in proportion to its population. So what that means is that in the House of Representatives, the amount of representatives, the amount of people coming from each state is based on how large the state is, how many people live there. So the larger the population, the more representatives they get to send to go help in the lawmaking for the House of Representatives. Now the Senate, the other part of the Congress, the Senate has 2 people from every state. So every state sends 2 people, 2 senators, and they make up the laws for that on that side of the Congress. The Congress and the Senate have to eventually work together to have a law passed, and we'll go over that later on. So let's keep reading at the bottom. Members of the House of Representatives are elected by the people for 2-year terms. So the House of Representatives, every time you get elected, you get 2 years. And at the end of that 2 years, you either don't run anymore and someone else gets elected, or you can run again and get re-voted in. In the original Constitution, senators were appointed for 6-year terms by their state legislators. This method of selecting senators was changed by the 17th Amendment in 1913. Article 1 gives Congress very specific powers, sometimes known as the enumerated powers. These include the power to declare war, to lay and collect taxes, to raise and support an army and navy, to coin money, to borrow money, to regulate interstate commerce, to establish post offices, to grant patents and copyrights, and to create lower courts. So that right there gave you a lot of information. These are the powers that the Congress has. So I want you to underline or highlight all the powers you see that the Congress has. So the things that Congress can do. So they include the power to declare war. So only Congress can declare war, not the president. To lay and collect taxes. So they're in charge of taxing people. To raise support for an army. So they make sure the army stays funded. To coin money, which means making money. Only the legislative branch can make money. To borrow money. And things like post office, stuff like that. So I want you to underline or highlight all of those. And then I want you to go to a little further back, and I want you to underline or highlight Congress and what it means. I want you to underline the 2 parts of Congress, so Senate and House of Representatives. And I want you to circle or highlight how many senators there are and how many people from the House of Representatives for each state. After you finish that, we're going to continue with the reading. Let's continue with the reading on the top of page 69. So back to what the powers Congress has. They have the power to create and to borrow money, to regulate interstate commerce, which means trading, to establish post office, to grant patents and copyrights, and to create the lower courts. Congress was always given the power to pass any law necessary and proper for carrying out the powers listed above. So that means anything that is necessary and proper to make sure any of those things above that we already circled or highlighted or underlined, to make sure they could do any of those, they can create any laws to make sure that they're able to get those done. So I want you to underline or highlight necessary and proper, that whole little paragraph right there, because we're going to be talking about that a lot throughout the year. A bill must pass both House of Congress and must be signed, both houses of Congress, and must be signed by the President in order to become a law. So the Congress, which we have already said is in two parts, the House of Representatives and the Senate, any bill, which is, a bill becomes a law, any bill that they're trying to pass has to get approved in the House of Representatives and approved by the Senate and then signed into law by the President. The President can veto, which means reject, a bill by refusing to sign it. A 2/3 majority in each house can pass a bill without the President's signature. This is known as overriding a veto. So if the law gets passed and it gets sent to the President and he doesn't like it, he can say, I'm not going to sign it, I'm going to veto this and send it back. But then as long as 2/3 of the House of Representatives and 2/3 of the Senate all vote saying they do want that law, they can overpower the President. But it's very unlikely and it doesn't happen that often. Okay, now look at the handout in front of you. You're going to answer the first question, which is also the active citizen question out of the book. List 2 important rules about Congress found in Article 1 of the Constitution. List 2 important rules about Congress found in Article 1 of the Constitution. So go back over what we just went over. Look up 2 rules, like 2 things that they have to do or ways things have to be done, and write them down on your handout. Article 2, the Executive Branch, the Presidency. The second article established the offices of President and Vice President. The President must be a natural-born citizen who is at least 35 years old. The President is chosen by the Electoral College after being elected. The President serves for a 4-year term. The President enforces our federal laws, serves as the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces, appoints and receives ambassadors, negotiates treaties, gives a State of the Union address, and appoints judges and other federal officials. So that's everything that the President can do. And then on the bottom, Congress can remove the President from the office for misconduct by impeachment. So if the President does something illegal or is doing something wrong, the Congress can all get together and vote to impeach them. So looking back over that section on Article 2, the Executive Branch, look at the one that says the President enforces our federal laws, serves as Commander-in-Chief. Above that one, I want you to write things the President can do. Right above that one, things the President can do. And then looking a little further back at the second bullet where it says the President must be natural-born citizen who is 35 years old, I want you to either underline or highlight or circle that sentence, because they have to be a natural-born citizen, which we covered is a citizen that was born here in the United States or, through law of the blood, has a parent that was born here in the United States. Natural-born citizen who is at least 35 years old. So you got to be at least 35. No one younger can run for president. Look, another active citizen question, which means you're going to need to write the answer on the handout you have with you. This question states, list 2 important rules about the President found in Article 2 of the Constitution. So I'm not going to say exactly where to look, but you were told to highlight or underline them. What are 2 rules that you have to follow in order to become president? Write them down and then continue on with the video. The bottom of page 69. Article 3, the Judicial Branch, the Supreme Court. This article established the Supreme Court as the highest court in the land, which means they're above, they outrank all the other courts. What the Supreme Court says, goes. The Supreme Court decides all disputes between states or concerning foreign ambassadors, and the Supreme Court can also hear appeals of other cases. Federal judges hold office for life during good behavior. So once you become a Supreme Court judge, you have that job for the rest of your life as long as, you're not breaking laws or anything. The Constitution did not create any lower federal courts. However, it gave Congress the power to create lower federal courts in the future. So the Supreme Court is the court over the entire land. Now you may go to a lower level court and they didn't make the decision and you're found guilty and you don't like it, so you want to appeal and you work your way up through the courts, and it could eventually go to the Supreme Court. But what they say goes. When you get to the Supreme Court, they have the final decision. On page 70, at the top, it starts with another active citizen question. So make sure you write the answer to this in the handout you have provided. List 2 important rules about the judicial branch found in Article 3 of the Constitution. So list 2 important rules or ways of doing things, the ways that the Constitution says they have to do things, that is in Article 3 of the Constitution for the judicial branch. The Constitution also has a number of other important provisions. So other important things, remember there are 7 articles, we've only covered 3, so other important things in the Constitution about how our government must run. If you look at Article 4, where it talks about the states, the citizen of every state enjoys the same rights and privileges in all other states. So that's important, because that's saying that you can't have rights in one state and not the other. Congress can admit new states into the Union. So every time a new territory wants to become a state, Congress is in charge of that. Every state is guaranteed the Republican form of government, and further prohibitions on state governments are found in Article 3. For example, states cannot enter into treaties, make alliance, or coin money. So what that's saying is states are not allowed to make treaties. So the state of Florida can't make a treaty with Canada. They can't make an alliance. So the state of Florida can't decide, all right, we're now going to become allies with France and we're going to go to war against someone. And they can't coin money or make their own money. Florida can't make Florida dollars. Georgia can't make Georgia dollars. Everyone has to use the money created by the national or federal government, the American dollar bill. Article 5, the amending process. The Constitution can be amended, which is added or changed. So when you add something to it or you change something, it needs to be amended. An amendment is harder to pass than an ordinary law. It must be approved by 2/3 of each House of Congress and then be ratified by 3/4 of the states. So I want you to underline or highlight that sentence. It must be approved by 2/3 of each House of Congress and then ratified by 3/4 of the states. So that means 2 out of every 3 senators and House of Representatives all have to vote saying yes, that they want to make that change or that amendment. And then after that happens, 3/4 of the states, so 3 out of every 4 states must also vote saying yes, they want that change to happen also. So it's really hard to amend or change our Constitution, which is a good thing because it provides the government from changing back and forth a lot. You want a good, steady, reliable government that can change if it's needed, but it just can't change on a whim. Article 6, the supreme law of the land. The Constitution and all federal laws are the supreme law of the land. Underline that sentence. What that's saying is that what the national government, the federal government, the American government over all the states, what they say is the law for every state. States can't make their own laws that go against what the federal government is doing. And Article 7, ratification. The last article establishes a procedure for deciding if the new Constitution should be adopted. Each state has to hold a special convention. The new Constitution would become effective once 9 of the 13 states have ratified, which means approved it. So that's how the Constitution got approved and got put into effect, is all the states had to go and vote whether or not they wanted to have it, and then it was ratified. Limited government, in the little cartoon. Now, take a look at the principles of the Constitution on page 71. Look at the little cartoon on the top. On the far left says, this government is too strong, and it's talking about the British monarchy. That was when we had a British king, when they had absolute control and power over what every person did. Then, you look at the middle box and it says, this government is too weak, talking about the Articles of Confederation. That's because that government didn't do a great job and we're going to go into detail and explain that a little further in the year. And then after the Articles of Confederation, we made the Constitution and the government we've had for over 200 years, and it says this government is just right. So the reading right below that. Remember, have your pen, pencil, or highlighter ready. The delegates to the Constitutional Convention struggled with one central issue. They wanted to create a central government strong enough to protect them and to promote greater cooperation, while not so strong that it would oppress them. So they wanted a strong enough government to, so that things could run and keep them protected and to make sure that they all have great cooperation so they're working together, but they didn't want one that was telling them what to do and oppressing them or keeping them down. The system of government they introduced to solve the problem rested on several key principles: popular sovereignty, limited government, federalism, separation of powers, and checks and balances. We're going to start by talking about popular sovereignty. The very first words of the Constitution are, "We the people." This expresses the fact that under our system of government, the people are the source of all political power. So I want you to underline or highlight that. The people are the source of all political power. So all power in the United States that the government officials have, the presidents and the senators, they get their power from us, and they can have it taken away from us. We can take it from them, and they will no longer be in power. John Locke had written that people choose their own government through a social contract. The Declaration of Independence likewise proclaimed that the government derived their just powers from the consent of the governed, which means they get their power from the people agreeing to let them have power. A sovereign is the supreme or highest authority in any government. Underline or highlight that definition. It is the authority that everyone else must obey. British subjects often referred to their king as their sovereign. In the United States, the people are sovereign, so the people are in charge. They are the final supreme political authority because we give them their jobs and we can take their job from them. The American people expressed their will by ratifying the Constitution. They continue to express their will by electing their representatives. These representatives, in turn, appoint other officials and make the decisions of government. Limited government. And the little cartoon right below says what the government can do and what the government can't do. Turn the page. The second principle of the Constitution is that of limited government. The Constitution established a much stronger national government, but this government was still only given limited powers, so there was a limit on the powers. It had only the powers specifically listed in the Constitution, especially in Article 1. These powers were granted to it by the people. So I want you to underline or highlight what limited government, the definition, and so pretty much that whole paragraph needs to be underlined or highlighted, but you also need to underline or highlight about limited powers. All other powers not listed in the Constitution were left to the state governments and the people. So the way it worked was the federal government, the national government we created that's in charge of everyone, only has the powers that we wrote down in the Constitution saying they could have. Everything else that not mentioned is left for the state and the people to decide. So the federal government can't decide to just start making laws about something that's not listed in the Constitution, and then the president can't just start trying to do things that aren't listed in the Constitution, because anything not listed, it's the job of the state and the people. These limits on the powers of our national government thus guaranteed the continuing importance of the state governments. This should be compared to conditions in many other countries at the time. Many rulers enjoyed absolute power, which means they're like a king. They have all the power in the world. There were no limits to what these rulers could do. The Tsar of Russia, for instance, could imprison his subjects and take away their property at will. Every person owed the Tsar absolute obedience. In the United States, neither Congress nor any state government has the power to take away someone's property or liberty without a just cause and a fair procedure. So, at the time when we created our government, kings and czars, other rulers around the world, had absolute power. And absolute power means what they say goes. There was no arguing back. We created a government where the rulers do not have absolute power. They only have the power to do what we told them they can do. Everything else is up to the people living in the country. So we created a government very different, completely different than any other government that was in the world at the time. Now make sure you finish the box, little chart, on page 2 in the handouts that are provided. It says, Popular Sovereignty and Limited Government. Read the instructions and fill in the information as you need to.